Let me ask you something. When was the last time you reheated leftovers without giving it a second thought? Maybe it was last night, a plate of rice from dinner, some chicken you made a few days ago, or a container of soup from the back of the fridge. Most of us do this every single day. It feels responsible, it saves money, it saves time. But here's what almost no one talks about, and what genuinely surprises many of my patients when I bring it up in the exam room. Reheating certain foods doesn't just warm them up. Depending on the food and how it's reheated, it can trigger a chain of chemical changes that puts real strain on one of the most overlooked organs in your body, the pancreas. I want to be clear from the start. This isn't about fear. This isn't about throwing away everything in your kitchen. The pancreas does its work quietly, and most of the time, we never think about it. But for adults over 60, that organ is working harder than it ever has, managing blood sugar, producing digestive enzymes, and handling decades of food choices. Certain reheated foods, eaten regularly over time, are now being linked in clinical research to an increased risk of pancreatic cancer, one of the most serious and least discussed cancers affecting older adults today. The reason most people miss this is that the danger isn't in the food itself. It's in what happens to the food when heat is applied a second or third time. That's the part nobody warned you about. In this video, I'll walk you through 5 specific foods that most seniors reheat without a second thought. Foods that, under certain conditions, may quietly increase cellular stress on the pancreas over time. We'll count down from number 5 to number 1. By the time we reach that final entry, I think you'll want to rethink at least one habit you've had for years. Let's get into it. My name is Dr. Owen Smith. I've spent over 2 decades in internal medicine and preventive health, focusing on what I call the quiet risks. The everyday habits that don't seem dangerous at all, right up until they are. This channel exists to give adults over 60 clear, honest, and practical health information that can actually change how you feel day to day. Everything here is grounded in current research, and we always encourage you to bring these conversations to your own doctor because your history and your medications are uniquely yours. Before we start, have you ever reheated a meal and noticed it felt heavier or harder to digest the second time around? If that sounds familiar, drop a comment below and tell me which food it was. Your experience might help someone else watching today. All right, let's count down, starting with number 5. Number 5, reheated processed meats. There's something deeply familiar about pulling a few slices of ham from the fridge, warming them up in a pan and folding them into a quick breakfast, or reheating leftover sausage from Sunday morning. It's fast, it's filling, and it's the kind of thing millions of people do without hesitation. But processed meats, including deli ham, sausage, hot dogs, bacon, and smoked lunch meats, are already considered a Group 1 carcinogen by the World Health Organization. That means the evidence linking them to cancer risk is strong. And what most people don't realize is that reheating these meats amplifies that risk in a very specific way. Here's why. Processed meats contain nitrates and nitrites, compounds added during curing and preservation. When those meats are cooked initially, some of those nitrites begin converting into a class of chemicals called nitrosamines. These are known to promote cellular damage in tissue lining, including the tissue that makes up the pancreatic ducts. When you reheat the same meat a second time, especially at high temperatures on a stovetop or in a microwave without moisture, more nitrosamines form. The heat-driven conversion accelerates. Think about this from a practical standpoint. If you're someone who keeps a batch of cooked sausage in the fridge and reheats it over a few mornings throughout the week, that repeated exposure adds up. For someone over 60 whose pancreatic tissue has already experienced decades of normal wear, reducing unnecessary chemical stress on that organ becomes genuinely meaningful. This doesn't mean one plate of reheated ham will hurt you. That's not how chronic disease risk works. But the pattern over months and years is where the concern lies. A 2019 analysis published in the International Journal of Cancer found that higher consumption of processed meats was significantly associated with increased pancreatic cancer risk, and cooking method played a role in how much of that exposure occurred. If you enjoy processed meats and don't want to give them up entirely, the more protective habit is to eat them freshly cooked rather than reheated. Limit frequency to 2 or 3 times per week, and always add moisture when reheating to reduce the temperature spike. Avoid charring or over-browning them in a dry pan, as that creates additional harmful compounds beyond the nitrosamine concern. Your pancreas never complains. It just keeps working. And that silence is exactly why habits like this deserve attention before symptoms ever appear. Number 4, reheated starchy carbohydrates. White rice, white bread, pasta walk into almost any senior household around dinner time, and there's a very good chance you'll find a container of leftover rice on the counter being warmed up for the meal. Rice is economical, easy to prepare, and practically universal across cultures. But it also carries a reheating risk that directly affects the pancreas, and it works through a mechanism most people have never heard of. When white rice, white bread, or regular pasta is cooked, the starch inside becomes easy to digest, almost too easy. Your digestive system breaks it down rapidly into glucose, causing a fast rise in blood sugar. Your pancreas responds by releasing insulin to manage that spike. For adults over 60, whose pancreatic beta cells are already less efficient than they were at 40, that demand is significant. Now here's where reheating changes things in a surprising way. When cooked starchy carbohydrates are cooled down, especially refrigerated overnight, the starch structure partially changes into what researchers call resistant starch. That's actually a beneficial change. Resistant starch is digested more slowly, causes a gentler rise in blood sugar, and feeds healthy gut bacteria. For people managing blood sugar, cooled rice and cooled pasta are measurably better. But the problem comes when you reheat those foods. Reheating breaks down the resistant starch again, reverting it closer to its original, rapidly digested form. So you lose the benefit that cooling created. And if you're reheating rice or pasta repeatedly, warming it up, letting it sit, warming it again, you're putting repeated demand on the pancreas to produce insulin surges every time you eat it. Over many years, chronic spiking of insulin demand stresses the pancreatic tissue and contributes to what researchers describe as a pro-inflammatory environment, one associated with a higher risk of pancreatic disease, including cancer in people with existing metabolic risk factors. A realistic example: many seniors have rice with 2 or 3 meals per day, reheating the same batch from the day before. If those meals also include other high-starch sides, the cumulative pancreatic demand throughout a single day can be surprisingly high. The practical adjustment here is simple. If you reheat rice or pasta, do it once only, not repeatedly. Keep portions moderate. Eat it alongside fiber and protein, which slows digestion and reduces the glucose spike. And if you can tolerate it, cold rice eaten as a side dish is genuinely better for your blood sugar than the same rice reheated. Small changes at the dinner table can make a meaningful difference over time. Number 3, reheated eggs. Eggs are one of the most nutritious foods available to older adults. They're affordable, easy to prepare, and rich in protein, choline, and vitamins that support brain and muscle health. For someone over 60 trying to eat well without overcomplicating meals, eggs are a natural choice. But there's a reheating pattern with eggs that directly affects how those nutrients behave and introduces a concern most people never anticipate. Here's the core issue. Eggs contain protein structures that change significantly with heat. When you cook an egg properly the first time, those proteins are gently denatured, unfolded, and made digestible. But when you reheat eggs, especially in a microwave, which heats unevenly and at high intensity, the proteins continue to break down further and oxidized cholesterol compounds can begin to form. Oxidized cholesterol is different from regular dietary cholesterol. When cholesterol molecules are exposed to repeated heat and oxygen, they undergo structural changes that make them pro-inflammatory in the body. Research has connected oxidized cholesterol intake to increased markers of cellular damage in digestive tract tissue, including tissue associated with the pancreas and surrounding organs. For the average healthy adult, an occasional reheated egg isn't a measurable danger. But for seniors who rely on eggs as a daily protein source and frequently reheat scrambled eggs or omelets from the morning in the microwave, sometimes heating the same portion 2 or 3 times because the center stayed cold, the cumulative exposure to these oxidized compounds becomes more relevant over months and years. There's also a practical detail worth noting. Many seniors prepare egg-based dishes in batches, a large frittata, a casserole, or a pan of scrambled eggs, and then pull from that batch across several days. If those portions are getting microwaved at full power each time, the oxidized cholesterol load builds with every cycle. It's not dramatic, but it's consistent. And consistency, for better or worse, is what shapes long-term health outcomes. The best approach with eggs is simple. Cook only what you intend to eat at that meal. Eggs take less than 5 minutes to prepare fresh. If you do need to reheat egg-based dishes, use the oven at low heat rather than a microwave. Add a splash of water to the dish and reheat just once until barely warm, not steaming hot. Your pancreas sits directly behind your stomach. What passes through your digestive system, especially repeatedly processed proteins, doesn't bypass it. Number 2, reheated spinach and leafy greens. This one genuinely surprises people because spinach has such a strong reputation as a health food, and it deserves that reputation. Spinach, kale, Swiss chard, and other leafy greens are loaded with iron, folate, magnesium, and antioxidants that support heart health, bone density, and even cognitive function. For adults over 60, these vegetables are among the most recommended foods there are. So what's the problem with reheating them? It comes down to something called nitrate conversion. Leafy greens, spinach especially, are naturally high in nitrates. These are not the same as the synthetic nitrates added to processed meats, but they undergo a similar transformation under certain conditions. When spinach is cooked and then cooled, naturally occurring bacteria begin converting those plant-based nitrates into nitrites. This process begins within hours and accelerates if the greens are stored uncovered or at room temperature. When you then reheat that spinach, especially in a microwave at high heat, those nitrites can convert further into nitrosamines. And as we discussed earlier, nitrosamines are compounds directly associated with cellular damage in the tissues of the gastrointestinal tract, including the pancreatic ducts. The irony is real. A vegetable that protects your health when eaten fresh can contribute to oxidative stress in the same organs when reheated improperly. This is especially relevant for seniors who batch cook vegetables one day and then reheat portions throughout the week. A common scenario might look like this: a large pan of sautéed spinach made on Monday, refrigerated in a loose container, and then microwaved for 2 to 3 minutes at full power on Wednesday and again on Friday. That's 2 additional heat cycles on a vegetable that has already undergone nitrate conversion during storage. The good news is that this risk is entirely avoidable without giving up leafy greens. The key is to eat them as close to freshly cooked as possible. If you do need to prepare them in advance, store them in an airtight container, refrigerate promptly, and use them within 1 day. When reheating, warm them gently and briefly, just enough to take the chill off rather than heating them thoroughly again. And whenever possible, eat leftover cooked greens cold as part of a salad rather than reheating them at all. Leafy greens remain one of the best food choices available to you. This is simply about how you handle them after cooking. Number 1. Reheated potatoes. Of everything on this list, this one is probably the most unexpected, and for many seniors, the most personally relevant. Potatoes are one of the most widely eaten foods in the world. Boiled, roasted, mashed, baked, they're filling, inexpensive, and easy to prepare in large batches. For older adults living alone or cooking for two, making a big pot of potatoes and reheating portions over several days just makes sense. It saves effort. It saves money. It's what many of us grew up doing without a second thought. But potatoes contain a natural compound called asparagine, an amino acid present in significant amounts in starchy vegetables. When asparagine is exposed to high heat during cooking, especially roasting, frying, or baking, it reacts with naturally occurring sugars in the potato to form acrylamide. Acrylamide is a chemical that the International Agency for Research on Cancer classifies as a probable human carcinogen, with particular concern for its effects on gastrointestinal tissue. Here's where the reheating risk becomes most serious. The first cooking of a potato already generates some level of acrylamide, more so with high dry heat methods like roasting or baking than with boiling. But when that potato is reheated, especially in an oven, air fryer, or on a hot pan, the same chemical reaction continues. Each additional heat exposure drives further acrylamide formation from the asparagine that remains in the potato starch. The concentration builds with every cycle. For adults over 60 who regularly reheat roasted potatoes, leftover home fries, or baked potato wedges, this is a pattern worth examining. The concern isn't a single meal. It's the cumulative acrylamide load that builds quietly over months and years of repeated reheating in a body that already has a higher baseline risk for pancreatic disease than it did at a younger age. Multiple large-scale studies have found associations between high dietary acrylamide exposure and elevated pancreatic cancer risk, particularly in non-smoking women and in adults with underlying metabolic conditions like insulin resistance or type 2 diabetes, both common in seniors. The practical guidance here is clear. Boiled or steamed potatoes produce far less acrylamide than roasted or fried ones, and they reheat more safely with gentle, moist heat. If you do reheat roasted potatoes, do it once only at the lowest effective temperature and avoid browning or crisping them further. Storing potatoes in the refrigerator before cooking rather than at room temperature can also reduce the sugar content that drives acrylamide formation. Your daily food choices are quietly shaping your health in ways you may not feel for years. This is one worth adjusting. We just covered 5 reheated foods that, over time and in the wrong patterns, can put real and unnecessary stress on the pancreas, an organ that works silently every single day to keep your blood sugar stable, your digestion moving, and your body functioning. Number 5 was processed meats, where repeated reheating increases harmful nitrosamine formation. Number 4 was starchy carbohydrates, like white rice and pasta, where reheating undoes the beneficial cooling effect and repeatedly spikes insulin demand. Number 3 was eggs, where microwaving produces oxidized cholesterol compounds that promote inflammation. Number 2 was reheated spinach and leafy greens, where nitrate conversion during storage creates nitrosamines that stress the tissue lining the digestive organs. Number 1, the most impactful, was reheated potatoes, where repeated high-heat cooking drives ongoing acrylamide formation, a probable carcinogen with direct links to pancreatic cancer risk in older adults. None of this means you need to stop eating leftovers. It means you need to be smarter about which ones, how you store them, and how many times you put them back in the heat. Start with one change this week. Maybe it's eating your spinach and leafy greens fresh instead of reheating a batch from 2 days ago. Maybe it's switching to boiled potatoes instead of reheating roasted ones throughout the week. Maybe it's cooking eggs fresh each morning rather than microwaving yesterday's omelet. Small, consistent shifts in daily kitchen habits are where long-term health protection actually lives, not in expensive supplements or complicated diets. Before making any significant changes to your eating patterns, especially if you're managing blood sugar, heart disease, or kidney concerns, please bring this conversation to your own doctor or dietitian. They know your history and can help you apply this in a way that fits your specific situation. If this video helped you see something you hadn't considered before, share it with a spouse, a sibling, or a friend. Sometimes the most important health conversations start with a video shared over morning coffee. Thank you for spending this time with me today. Take care of your pancreas. Take care of yourself. I'll see you in the next video.